welcome back to That History Dude. Today we will be going over Clan Stewart and all the branches that stemmed from it and related clans. To begin with, we have Alan. Now, Alan was the Steward of Dol. Dol is a place in Brittany on the northwest coast of what is today France. It was a separate country than Francia. It was the Kingdom of Brittany. You had the Bretons. They were a Brythonic people that were related to the peoples of Cornwall and Wales. They were of Celtic origin. Now, Alan, he himself, had 3 children. He had Rywallon, who became a monk of St. Florence. Another Alan, who took over his father's position as Steward of Dol. The steward was a hereditary position. And then he had another son, Flad Fitzalan. The way they did the surnames in the medieval period was similar to the Norwegian, where you would have Fitz, meaning son of, and then Alan, his father's name. That was common use in France, and it was common use in Brittany before the normalization of an actual surname such as Stuart, and all your children having the surname Stewart came into use. Now, Flad Fitzalan had a son, and his name was Alan Fitzflad. Now, it is this son, Alan, who was one of those Norman knights that came along with William the Conqueror and adventured into England. He was given lands in England and in Scotland for his service. His son, Walter, inherited the Scottish lands and became High Steward. And then William inherited the lands of Oswestry in England, and those lands would go down to his descendants in England and later become the Earls of Arundel. So, with Alan, as I have here, married a woman named Avelina. Together, they had several children. We can start with Simon Fitzalan. Now, Simon Fitzalan would go on to have a child, Robert Boyd Fitzsimon, and he is the progenitor of Clan Boyd in the Scottish Highlands. We move to Jordan Fitzalan, who was Dapfer in Brittany. Again, Dapfer is another term for steward. So he went back to the home country of Brittany and served there, and not much else is known of him. The main people that we have historical records for, and that is remembered because they were landed gentry or people of high positions, was Walter Fitzalan, the first High Steward of Scotland, who died in 1177, and his brother, William Fitzalan, who was Lord of Oswestry, who was born circa 1105 and died around 1160. He forms the House Fitzalan, and again will later become the Earls of Arundel in England. One thing to point out about Walter Fitzalan, the first High Steward of Scotland, he led the Royal Scottish Army against Somerled in 1164 at the Battle of Renfrew, where Somerled met his end. And for those who know anything about Somerled or have seen my other videos on Clan Sorley, he is the progenitor of the MacDougals, the MacDonalds, McRorys, and several other clans. However, Walter would go on to marry a woman by the name of Sheena, and together they did have a daughter who married a Donald MacDonald, Lord of Islay and the Isles. He is the son of Ranald MacDonald, and he is the grandson of Somerled. So Walter was fighting his son-in-law's grandfather, basically. Donald is the actual progenitor of Clan Donald. So if you know anyone of last name MacDonald, any of the various ways of spelling, they all stem from him and the unknown daughter of Walter Stewart. Now on to his son and heir, Alan Fitzwalter. He was the second High Steward of Scotland. Lived about from 1140 to 1205. He married first Eva, who was a daughter of Swen Thorson, who was the sheriff of East Lothian. But he somehow made a deal with Morgan, the second Earl of Mar, and was able to marry his daughter, Alesta of Mar. So therefore, he annulled his marriage with Eva and then married secondly Alesta. And from that union formed Evelina Fitzalan, his daughter, David Fitzalan, Leonard Fitzalan, and Walter Stewart of Dundald, who would go on and be his heir. Evelina married Duncan MacGilbert, the first Earl of Carrick, and together their children would be part of House Galloway. Now his heir, Walter Stewart of Dundald, this is the first time that the High Stewards take their title and have made it a surname. It is no more of the Fitzwalters or Fitzalans. It is now Stuart. So, Walter Stewart of Dundald, he is the third High Steward, died about 1246, and married Beatrix MacGilchrist of Angus. She is the daughter of Gilchrist, the fourth Earl of Angus, lived about 1154 to 1206, and Marjorie Dunkeld of Huntingdon, the descendant of the kings of Scotland. This right here, this union, is but one of many of the claims that the Stuarts would have into the marriage and intermarriages into the royal family when it came down to the civil wars and wars of independence against England and the interregnums as they came to be known. Together, they had many children. We will start with his daughters Beatrix Stewart, who married Amal Duncan, 3rd Earl of Lennox, who died about 1250, and together their children were of House Lennox, obviously. Eupheme Stewart, who married Adam Wallace, the 3rd Laird of Riccarton, and he is actually related and kin to the famous William Wallace. I'm sure most of you listening in have watched the movie Braveheart. Together they did have children, and they were of Clan Wallace. Now, Adam Wallace, the 3rd Laird of Riccarton, it is not known how he is related to William Wallace. Not a lot of records remain of William Wallace's genealogy or his history per se. He's one of those historical figures that literally popped out of nowhere. We just know that he is related to this person, just don't know how. Some other children were William Stewart and Christian Stewart and John Stewart. And then we have Sir Robert Stewart, Lord of Darnley. He became the Lord of Darnley, but he never had any children or heirs to pass the lordship on to, so it was brought back into the main family. Then you have Margaret Stewart. Margaret married Niall, 2nd Earl of Carrick, who is the grandson of Duncan, the 1st Earl of Carrick. So if you see Margaret's aunt, so Margaret here, her father Walter, Walter's sister Evelina, married Duncan. So Margaret and Niall are doing the mental math right now. Margaret's aunt and uncle are Niall's grandparents. So that is very close relationship. Now their children were Marjorie, who was the 3rd Countess of Carrick in her own right, and Isabella of Carrick. Marjorie married Robert Bruce, the 6th Lord of Annandale, and he became Earl of Carrick. And then his sons and so forth of Clan Bruce would take on the earlship of Carrick. And here we have Isabella of Carrick, who married Alan McRory, the 3rd Lord of Glamorgan, who died in 1293. Together they would have children of Clan McRory. Now Alan, he himself is a great-grandson of Somerled, so he is related to Donald and Ranald and several others on this tree, because the Stewarts heavily married into the Clan Sorley family, which means all of Somerled's descendants, whether they be McRory, McAngus, MacDonald, etc. Sibylla Stewart married Colin Fitzgerald, the 1st Lord of Kintill, who died in 1278. Together, their children would be of Clan Mackenzie. Colin was the progenitor of Clan Mackenzie. And then we move to Walter Baylock Stewart. The only reason that he had an earldom, and he was the 1st Earl of Menteith, mind you, the 2nd creation, is because his wife, Mary of Menteith, who was the sole heiress of the earldom of Menteith from her father, Murdoch II, who was the 3rd Earl of Menteith, the 1st creation, who died in 1231. Together, their children would be the Menteith Stewarts, who would inherit the earldom and other lordships as well. Now, I did not put their line in this tree. Matter of fact, I didn't put any of the branches lines. As you can see, I did an overview of the main branch of Stewarts. To add all the other branches and intermarriage and mixing and so on and so forth would have been one of the craziest trees to have seen. I'm going to be doing separate charts and separate videos on all the families, all the branches, I should say, of the main family of the Clan Stewart. It is just so much information to do all in one blast. And now we move to Alexander Stewart, the 4th High Steward of Scotland, who lived about from 1210 to 1282 and married, as I said, another descendant of Somerled, Jane McAngus. She is the daughter of James McAngus, who was Lord of Bute and died in 1210. She is a great-granddaughter of Somerled. Together, they had several children. They had Sir John Stewart of Bonkle, who died in 1298. And again, this is one of those lucky marriages. Sir John Stewart married Margaret de Bonkle, who was the sole heiress of her father, who was the Lord of Bonkle. And since she inherited it, her husband took her father's title and made it his own. And this is how you have the Bonkle Stewarts. And as you can see here, you can see the difference in the heraldry and how each one is changing just a bit. The Bonkle Stewarts were a very, very lucky family. They married with great luck into great houses, and they would eventually all dominate Scotland with immense land and power. So, before moving down, I just want to finish up Sir John's siblings. His sister, High Stewart, married Sir John de Soulis, who was a guardian of Scotland during one of the interregnums. He died in 1310. And then we have Elizabeth Stuart, who died 1288 and married William the Hardy Douglas, Lord of Douglas. And he would go on, they would have many children together, and they were of Clan Douglas. And then you had James Stuart, the 5th High Steward of Scotland. He had 3 marriages. So, he also was elected to be one of the 6 guardians of the Scottish throne during the interregnum. He supported William Wallace in the Scottish Wars of Independence. And after William Wallace was captured and killed, and then cut up in pieces and split all around England, he supported Robert the Bruce and his claim to the crown. His first marriage was to Cecilia de Dunbar, who, if you've watched my Dunbar video, she is a descendant of the kings of Scotland. The Dunbar family comes from the Dunkeld family. She died in 1289. They never had any children together. The marriage was annulled, and he married secondly to Muriel of Strathern. Muriel of Strathern was the daughter of Malaise II, the 5th Earl of Strathern. That marriage, it is not clear if they had children, if Andrew or John are of that marriage. We know that Sir Andrew Stuart and Sir John Stuart, that died in 1318, they are sons of James. We do not know who their mothers are. Records are not clear on that. What we do know is that James married for a 3rd time to Gydia de Burgh, the daughter of Walter de Burgh, the 1st Earl of Ulster. And together, they had 5 children. And that is Walter Stewart, the 6th High Steward of Scotland, Sir James Stewart of Durrisdeer, and Egidia Stewart. So 3 from the marriage with Egidia, and the other 2, again, we don't know who their mothers are. Before I move into this generational line, let's travel back over here to the different branches. So, as I said, Sir John Stewart of Bonkle and his wife Margaret. Let's start over here. You have Sir Alexander Stewart of Bonkle, who died in 1319 and married Jean Fitz Alexander. Their descendants would later inherit the earldom of Angus, and they would be known as the Angus Stewarts. Then you had Sir Alan Stewart of Dreghorn, who died in 1333. So one of his sons would go on to inherit the lordship of Darnley, and they would be the Darnley Stewarts. This is the patrilineal line of King James VI of Scotland and King James I of England. He was the sixth king in Scotland. He was the first in England. What I'm trying to say is he was the king of both Scotland and England and Ireland when he inherited both crowns. This is the patrilineal line where those kings come from after the death of their mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, Queen of Scots, comes from the main branch of the Stuart line, the High Steward line that we are following. His other sons would go on to do great things. They would inherit the earldom of Lennox, and you would have the Lennox Stewarts. You had another son who fought in France, and while fighting in France, he gained land. That family would be known as can't even pronounce it in French, the Albigny or Albigny Stewarts. Their line continues to this day, and they also intertwined with a lot of the other cousins. Then you had Sir Hugh Stewart of Bonkle, died without issue. Sir John Stewart of Dowden, who also died without issue. And then you had Isabella Stewart of Bonkle, who married Thomas Randolph, the first Earl of Moray. And their line would be of Clan Randolph. And then Sir James Stewart of Pearson, who died in 1333, his children would inherit the lordship of Lorne, the earldom of Athol, the earldom of Buchan, the earldom of Traquair, and would create an offshoot of the clan, and they would be known as the Appine Stewarts in the Highlands. Then you have Sir Robert Stewart of Daldowie, and they would create a separate branch of the family, and they would change their name into House Stewart, but spelled Euart, and then it would be Seton Stewart. They intermarried with the Setons. And then Sir Walter Stewart of Garleys and Dalsmonton. You would have the lordship of Garleys, the Garley Stewarts, the lordship of Galloway, and the lordship of Blantyre. 3 branches of this house. Moving back to the main branch that we are focusing on over here with Walter Stewart the Sixth, High Steward of Scotland. He first married Marjorie Bruce. Now, Marjorie Bruce was the eldest daughter of Robert the Bruce, the King of Scotland, and Isabella of Mar. After her brother David II died with no heirs, the kingdom passed through her to her son, who would become Robert II, becoming King of Scotland. He was the only son of that first marriage. Here is a portrait of him. He was born 1316, died in 1390. He is the first Stuart king after the Bruces. Now, Walter Stewart did marry a second time because Marjorie died in childbirth, to Isabel Graham. And together they had Sir Andrew Stuart, who was a knight and died without issue, John Stewart of Ralston, and Egedia Stewart. Egedia married Sir James Douglas of Dalkeith, and together their children would be of Clan Douglas, specifically of the Dalkeith branch, which continued well into the 1800s. And I think even today, I'm currently doing research on them, and you can expect a video on Clan Douglas and all of their branches shortly, as soon as I'm done with the Stewarts. Then you have John Stewart of Ralston, who had a daughter, Euphemia Stewart, who married Sir Patrick Dunbar of Beal. If you've watched my Clan Dunbar video, then you can see his side of the family and how they're connected to Euphemia. And he did have children. So, again, an overview. The Stewart family rose to prominence with the intermarriage of Walter Stewart and Marjorie Bruce, with Robert II being born. When Robert II Stuart was King of Scotland, it was actually he who was able to help his family marry the right people and intermarry into powerful noble families, growing their meager lordships into earldoms and then even dukedoms through the generations. The Stuarts would be kings of Scotland, and then again, as I said, also kings of Ireland and England. From 1371, when Robert II became king, to 1651, then followed by an interregnum between 1651 to 1660, and then they changed the spelling of their name to the Stuart, and then the Stuart family was then restored to the monarchy of Great Britain from 1660 to 1707, and that is Clan Stewart.